The wind howled through the pine trees like a wounded animal, carrying with it the bitter promise of a Montana winter that showed no mercy. Jacob Hartwell pulled his worn leather coat tighter around his chest, though he knew it would do little against the cold that had settled deep into his bones. It wasn't just the December chill that made him shiver, it was the emptiness that had taken root in his chest since Sarah died 6 months ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. His horse, a sturdy buckskin mare named Copper, picked her way carefully along the mountain pass. The snow had been falling for 3 days straight, transforming the familiar trail into a treacherous white expanse, where one wrong step could send both horse and rider tumbling down the rocky slope. Jacob should have stayed at the ranch, should have waited out the storm like any sensible man would. But the walls of his cabin had been closing in on him, and the silence there was louder than any blizzard. He'd ridden into Silver Ridge that morning to pick up supplies: flour, coffee, ammunition. The kind of things a man needed to survive a winter alone. Old Pete at the general store had tried to make conversation, asked him how he was holding up, but Jacob had just nodded and paid for his goods. Words felt like stones in his mouth these days. What was there to say? That he woke up every morning reaching for someone who wasn't there. That he'd burned Sarah's favorite stew last week because he'd forgotten to stir it, too lost in memories of how she used to hum while she cooked. The trail narrowed as it wound higher into the mountains. This was the long way home, the route that added an extra 2 hours to his journey, but Jacob had chosen it deliberately. The main road would have been easier, faster, but it passed by the churchyard where Sarah was buried. He wasn't ready to see that stone marker again, wasn't ready to face the proof that she was really gone. Copper suddenly threw her head up, ears swiveling forward. Jacob's hand instinctively moved to the rifle strapped to his saddle. Mountain lions weren't uncommon in these parts, and a hungry cat wouldn't think twice about attacking a lone rider. But as he scanned the white landscape, he saw no yellow. Eyes gleaming from the shadows, no telltale tracks in the fresh snow dot. Then he saw a splash of crimson against the pristine white, just off the side of the trail. Blood. His throat tightened. Probably a deer taken down by wolves, he told himself. Nothing to concern him. He should keep riding, get home before the storm worsened. But Copper was already moving toward it, drawn by some instinct that Jacob couldn't explain. As they drew closer, the red resolved itself into fabric silk, impossibly delicate and completely unsuitable for Montana winter. And beneath it, partially buried in a snowdrift, was a person. Jacob's heart kicked hard against his ribs as he swung down from the saddle, his boots crunching through the snow. She was young, probably no more than 20, with black hair that spilled across the white snow like ink. Her skin held a golden tone that marked her as Chinese, and her dress god. Her dress was the kind of thing you'd see in a San Francisco parlor, all embroidered silk and delicate buttons, now stiff with ice. Her lips had gone blue, and frost clung to her eyelashes. She wasn't moving. Jacob dropped to his knees beside her, yanking off his glove to press 2 fingers against her neck. For a moment, there was nothing, and he felt a familiar surge of helpless rage, the same feeling that had consumed him when he'd held Sarah's hand as the fever took her, unable to do anything but watch her slip away. Then he felt it, a pulse. Faint and irregular, but there. "Ma'am?" His voice came out rough from disuse. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, and for just a moment, her eyes opened. They were dark brown, almost black, and filled with something that looked like terror. Her lips moved, forming words in a language he didn't understand. Then her eyes rolled back, and she went limp again. Jacob looked around, as if the empty landscape might offer him some guidance. The logical part of his brain cataloged the facts. She was dying, he was alone, and the nearest town was hours away in this weather. She wouldn't survive the journey to Silver Ridge, and even if she did, Doc Morrison was visiting his daughter in Helena and wouldn't be back for a week. The ranch was closer 40 minutes if he pushed hard, but what could he do for her there? He wasn't a doctor. He could barely take care of himself. He should leave her. The thought came unbidden and shameful, but it was there. She was already halfway gone. Whoever had left her here, and someone must have left her, because people didn't just appear in the middle of mountain passes wearing silk dresses. They'd made their choice. It wasn't his responsibility. He had enough ghosts haunting him without adding another. But even as these thoughts formed, his hands were moving, scooping her up out of the snow. She was lighter than he expected, nothing but bones and frozen fabric. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel how cold. She was even through his coat. He carried her to Copper, who stood steady as he awkwardly maneuvered the girl onto the saddle. Getting mounted behind her while keeping her from sliding off was harder than he'd expected. His bad knee, the one that still ached from the time a bull had thrown him 5 years back, protested as he hauled himself up. He settled the girl in front of him, one arm locked around her waist to hold her upright, and gathered the reins with his free hand. "Come on, girl," he murmured to Copper. "Let's get home." The mare seemed to understand the urgency. She picked up her pace, moving as fast as she safely could through the deepening snow. Jacob held the Chinese girl close, trying to share what little warmth he had. Her head rested against his chest, and he could feel her shallow breathing through his coat. Every minute or so, he'd check to make sure she was still alive, his heart clenching each time until he felt that faint pulse. Questions spun through his mind as they rode. What was a Chinese girl doing on a Montana mountain pass in the middle of winter? The nearest Chinese settlement was in Butte, a good 50 miles south. She wasn't dressed for travel, wasn't dressed for anything except maybe a fancy dinner party. And those bruises on her wrists, he'd noticed them when he'd picked her up, dark marks that stood out against her pale skin. Someone had held her hard. The wind picked up, driving snow into his face until he could barely see. Copper knew the way home, though, her instincts more reliable than his vision in these conditions. Jacob hunched over the girl, trying to shield her from the worst of it. His fingers were going numb where they gripped the reins, and he could no longer feel his toes in his boots. Just when he thought they might be lost, that Copper had gotten turned around in the storm. He saw the fence line that marked his property. Relief flooded through him, followed quickly by a new wave of anxiety. Getting her to the ranch was only the first problem. Keeping her alive was going to be the real challenge. The ranch house emerged from the white curtain of snow, a dark shape that had never looked more welcoming. Jacob guided Copper to the barn, grateful for the relative shelter as they passed through the wide doors. Inside, the air was still cold, but at least free of the biting wind. His 2 other horses, a bay gelding named Chester and an old gray mare called Bess, nickered in greeting from their stalls. Dismounting while holding the unconscious girl was even harder than mounting had been. Jacob's legs had gone stiff from the cold and the ride, and he nearly fell as his boots hit the ground. He staggered, caught himself against Copper's shoulder, and managed to keep the girl from sliding off. She made a small sound, the first noise he'd heard from her, and her eyes cracked open again. "You're safe," he said, though he wasn't sure if that was true or if she could even understand him. "I've got you." Her lips moved again, forming words in Chinese. Then she said something else. Clearer this time. "Please ... Her English was accented but understandable, and the fear in her voice made his chest tighten. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jacob said. "You're hurt, frozen. I'm going to take you inside, get you warm." But she was already fading again, her brief moment of consciousness slipping away. Jacob shifted her weight in his arms and headed for the house. Leaving Copper still saddled, he'd come back for her once he'd dealt with the more immediate crisis. House was dark and cold, the fire in the stove having died hours ago. Jacob kicked the door shut behind him and carried the girl to the bedroom, his bedroom, the one he'd shared with Sarah, He hadn't been able to sleep there since she died. Had been making do with the old couch in the front room. But it was the warmest room in the house, closest to the kitchen where he could stoke up the stove. He laid her on the bed, then immediately went to work on the stove, building up a fire that would drive the chill from the house. His hands shook as he struck the match, and he had to force himself to slow down to do it right. A house fire wouldn't help anyone. While the stove heated up, he went back to the bedroom. The girl's dress was soaked through, frozen in places, and he knew he needed to get her out of it before hypothermia took her completely. This was the kind of thing Sarah would have known how to handle. She'd always been the practical one. The one who knew about medicine and nursing. Jacob had worked with animals all his life, knew how to birth a calf or set a horse's broken leg. But human anatomy was different. He found Sarah's old nightgown in the chest at the foot of the bed, the one she'd worn on cool summer nights. His throat tightened as he held it, remembering how she'd looked in it, her hair loose around her shoulders. Then he shook off the memory and set it aside, getting the girl out of her wet clothes, while maintaining some sense of decency was awkward and difficult. He kept his eyes averted as much as possible, focusing on the practical task at hand. The silk dress was buttoned up the back with what seemed like 100 tiny buttons, many of them frozen solid. He ended up having to cut through the fabric in places, cursing his clumsy fingers. Underneath, she wore layers undergarments that were just as soaked and frozen as the outer dress. More bruises became visible as he worked, on her ribs, her shoulders, the back of her legs. Someone had beaten her, and recently. Anger kindled in his chest, a hot spark in the cold numbness that had defined him for months, when he finally had her in Sarah's nightgown, covered with every blanket he could find. He went to work on warming the house properly. He filled pots with snow and set them on the stove to melt for warm water. He made coffee, strong and black, because he needed something to do with his hands. He went back out to the barn to unsaddle Copper and care for the horses, his mind spinning with questions he couldn't answer. By the time he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, the house had warmed considerably. He filled a basin with warm water, not too hot. He knew that much about treating hypothermia, and carried it to the bedroom. The girl was still unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. He took one of Sarah's old cloths and began carefully warming her hands and feet, trying to bring circulation back gradually. "Who are you?" he asked in the silent room. "And what the hell happened to you?" No answer came, just the sound of the wind outside and the crackle of the fire. Jacob settled into the chair beside the bed, the one Sarah used to sit in when she was mending or reading. He should sleep, knew he'd need his strength for whatever came next. But every time he started to doze off, he'd jerk awake, checking to make sure the girl was still breathing. Somewhere around midnight, her eyes opened again. This time, they focused on him with more awareness, though confusion and fear were still written clearly across her face. She tried to sit up, gasped at what must have been pain from her injuries, and fell back against the pillows. "Easy, Jacob," said, holding up his hands in what he hoped was a non-threatening gesture. "You're safe here. I found you in the snow. You were dying." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her mind working, trying to assess whether he was telling the truth. Then she spoke, her English halting but clear. "They will come looking. You must ... you must send me away." "Who will come looking?" But she was fading again, her burst of consciousness depleting what little strength she had. "Dangerous," she whispered. "He is ... very dangerous." Then her eyes closed, and despite Jacob's attempts to rouse her, she slipped back into unconsciousness. He sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Dangerous. Someone was dangerous. Someone who would come looking for her. He thought about those bruises, about her terror, about the fact that she'd been left to die on a mountain pass in the middle of winter. Jacob stood and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out at the storm. The snow was still, falling heavy, covering everything in white. If someone was coming, they wouldn't be coming tonight. The storm would keep everyone holed up, would buy him time to figure out what to do. He should take her to the sheriff in Silver Ridge as soon as the weather cleared. Let Tom Bradshaw handle whatever trouble was chasing this girl. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. Jacob had no business getting involved in other people's problems. He had enough of his own, but as he looked back at the girl small and broken in Sarah's nightgown, surrounded by Sarah's blankets and Sarah's bed, he knew he wasn't going to do this smart thing. Maybe it was because saving her was the first thing that had made him feel alive in 6 months. Maybe it was because he recognized that look of desperate fear, having felt it himself when he'd watched Sarah die. Or maybe it was simply because he was tired of being alone with his grief, tired of the silence and the emptiness. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Whatever the reason, Jacob Hartwell had made his choice the moment he'd pulled her onto his saddle. Now he just had to figure out how to keep them both alive long enough to understand what he'd gotten himself into. Dawn came reluctantly, gray light filtering through windows still rattled by wind. Jacob woke with his neck stiff from sleeping. In the chair, his coffee from the night before stone cold in the mug beside him. The girl hadn't stirred since her brief moment of consciousness at midnight. He checked her pulse again, stronger now, more regular, and felt something unclench in his chest. He stoked the fire in the stove and put on a fresh pot of coffee, his movements automatic from years of routine. Through the kitchen window, he could see the storm had finally broken. The world outside was buried under at least 2 feet of fresh snow, the morning sun making it glitter like crushed diamonds. Beautiful and deadly in equal measure. The chickens would need tending. The horses needed hay. Life on a ranch didn't stop just because you'd hauled a half-frozen stranger home. Jacob shrugged into his heavy coat and headed out to the barn, his boots breaking through the crust of ice that had formed overnight. Chester and Bess greeted him with impatient whinnies. Copper stood quietly in her stall, and Jacob took extra time brushing her down, grateful for the Mare's steady temperament during yesterday's crisis. As he worked, his mind kept circling back to the girl's words. They will come looking. He is very dangerous. Who was he? A husband? Jacob had noticed no ring on her finger, but that didn't mean much. A father? An employer? The bruises suggested someone who thought they owned her, someone who believed they had the right to hurt her. His jaw tightened at the thought. The chickens were huddled in their coop, resentful of the cold. Jacob scattered feed and collected 4 eggs, warm in his gloved hands. He'd make breakfast something simple. If the girl woke, she'd need food. If she didn't, well, he'd eat it himself and try again at lunch. When he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, he heard movement from the bedroom. He set the eggs down carefully and moved to the doorway. The girl was awake, sitting up in bed with the blankets clutched to her chest. Her eyes, clear now and fully alert, fixed on him with an intensity that made him stop in his tracks. "You brought me here," she said. Not a question, but a statement, her accent making the words precise and careful. "Found you dying on the mountain pass," Jacob replied. "Didn't seem right to leave you there." She studied him for a long moment, taking in his weathered face, his work-worn hands. The grief that he knew still showed in the lines around his eyes. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy something, because her shoulders relaxed fractionally. "My name is May Lynn. Jacob Hartwell. This is my ranch." He gestured vaguely at the surrounding house. "You've been unconscious mostly since I brought you here yesterday afternoon. How do you feel?" "Cold," she said simply. Then, with what might have been the ghost of humor, "Less cold than before, I think." Jacob found himself almost smiling at that. "I'll make breakfast. You should eat something. Get your strength back." "Mr. Hartwell." Her voice stopped him as he turned toward the kitchen. You need to understand something. The people who are looking. For me, they are not good men. If they find me here, they will hurt you, kill you maybe. You should take me to town, tell the law, and forget you ever saw me. Storm dumped 2 feet of snow last night, Jacob said. Main road won't be passable for at least 3 days, maybe more. And even if it was, I'm not sure the law is going to help you much. Something flickered across her face, resignation, maybe, or a bitter kind of knowing. You understand more than you say. I understand you were beaten and left to die. I understand you're scared. Rest is just details. He moved into the kitchen, cracking eggs into a pan. You drink coffee? Yes. There was surprise in her voice, as if she hadn't expected such a normal question. Please. He made breakfast while she watched from the bedroom doorway, wrapped in one of Sarah's quilts. She'd found his wife's old slippers too, he noticed, several sizes too big and shuffling on her small feet. The sight created an odd ache in his chest, not quite grief, but something adjacent to it. Your wife? Mei Lin asked, gesturing to the nightgown she wore. The word came out rougher than he intended. 6 months ago. Fever took her. I'm sorry. The sympathy in her voice sounded genuine, not the hollow condolences he'd grown tired of hearing. It is hard, losing someone. Yeah. Jacob plated the eggs, added some bread he'd baked 2 days ago. You lose someone too? Her hands tightened on the quilt. Many someones. My family, back in China, and then. She trailed off, accepting the plate he offered. Thank you. They ate in silence. Jacob at the small kitchen table, Mei Lin perched on the edge of the chair across from him. She ate slowly, as if her stomach wasn't sure it could handle food. But she finished everything on her plate. Color was coming back into her face, though the bruises stood out starkly against her skin in the morning light. You said he last night, Jacob said finally. Before you passed out again. Said someone was dangerous, that they'd come looking. Mei Lin set down her fork, her expression going carefully blank. It is better if you do not know the details. Maybe. But I figure I've got a right to know what kind of trouble I'm harboring. Harboring, she tasted the word. That is what you think you are doing, isn't it? She looked down at her hands, at the bruises circling her wrists like dark bracelets. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet he had to lean forward to hear it. His name is William Thornton. He owns the Silver Star Mining Company. You know it? Jacob felt something cold settle in his gut. Everyone in Montana knew the Silver Star. It was one of the biggest operations in the territory, with mines in 3 counties and enough political influence to make or break local governments. William Thornton was more than just a rich man. He was power incarnate, the kind of person who could make problems disappear. I know it, he said carefully. I was brought to America 3 years ago, Mei Lin continued, her eyes still fixed on her hands. They said I would work in a restaurant. Good wages, a chance to send money home to my mother. But the restaurant was not a restaurant. It was. She hesitated, searching for words. A place where men come to buy women. Jacob's jaw clenched. He'd heard of such places, though he'd never set foot in one. In the mining camps and railroad towns, Chinese women were often trafficked under false pretenses, trapped in brothels with no way out. Thornton was a customer, Mei Lin said. But he decided he wanted more than a customer gets. He bought my contract, said I would be his alone. Kept me in a house in Butte, like a bird in a cage. Her voice had gone flat, emotionless, as if she were reciting facts about someone else's life. At first, he was kind. Gave me dresses, jewelry. But kindness from a man like that always has a price. He hurt you. When I tried to leave, yes. When I refused to do what he wanted, yes. When he drank too much, yes. She finally looked up, meeting Jacob's eyes. 3 days ago, I learned he planned to sell me to a man in Denver. A collector, he called him. Someone who likes to hurt women. For pleasure. I knew if I went to Denver, I would die there, so I ran. Jacob absorbed this, his mind working through the implications. The silk dress. That was his? He liked me to dress fine. Said it showed I belonged to something better than a common brothel. Bitterness edged her words. I did not think about being prepared for weather. I only thought about running. How'd you end up on the mountain pass? I hid in a wagon leaving Butte, covered by canvas. When the driver stopped to rest his horses, I ran to the trees. I heard him calling, heard dogs, so I kept running. She pulled the quilt tighter. I do not remember much after that. Cold. So much cold. And then your face. The scope of what she'd survived hit Jacob with unexpected force. She'd fled a man with enough power to own people, had run through a Montana winter in a silk dress, had been hunted like an animal. And somehow, by sheer stubborn will or blind luck, she'd survived long enough for him to find her. Thornton will have men searching, Maylin said. He does not like to lose his possessions. And he will be angry that I ran, angry enough to make an example of me. Anyone who helps me ... She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Jacob stood and walked to the window. The snow-covered land stretched away in all directions, pristine and empty. His nearest neighbor was 5 miles south, and they weren't close. Nobody would know Maylin was here unless someone came looking. And if Thornton's men came, if they searched his property. There's a root cellar, he heard himself say. Under the trap door in the pantry. Sarah used to store preserves down there. Keep vegetables fresh. It's small, but if someone came around asking questions, you could hide. You would do this? Maylin's voice held disbelief. Even knowing what he could do to you? Jacob turned to face her. My wife spent her last weeks in that bed you slept in, burning up with fever while I sat helpless beside her. I couldn't save her. Couldn't do a damn thing except watch her die. The words came out harsh, scraped from somewhere deep. Maybe I can't protect you from Thornton forever. Maybe he'll come here and burn my ranch to the ground. But I'm not going to hand you over to him, not without a fight. Maylin stood slowly, the quilt falling away. In Sarah's nightgown and oversized slippers, she should have looked ridiculous. Instead, she looked dignified, composed despite everything she'd endured. You are a good man, Jacob Hartwell. I'm a stubborn man, there's a difference. But he felt something shift in his chest, some small piece of the numbness that had gripped him since Sarah's death beginning to crack. You should rest more. You've been through hell. I have been through hell, she agreed. But I am still here. That means something. Over the next 2 days, they settled into an uneasy routine. Maylin's strength returned gradually. By the second morning, she insisted on helping with household tasks, despite Jacob's protests that she should rest. He found her in the kitchen, attempting to work out his coffee pot with a determined expression. The water goes in the top, he said from the doorway. She jumped, then frowned at the pot. I have never used one like this. In Thornton's house, servants made coffee. Here, I'll show you. He moved to her side, guiding her through the process. She learned quickly, he noticed. By the time the coffee was brewing, she'd memorized each step. They fell into a pattern. Jacob handled the outdoor work, the horses, the chickens, splitting wood for the stove. Maylin took over the cooking, and he was surprised to discover she had a talent for it. She made simple meals from his limited supplies, but added flavors he'd never tasted before, spices she found in Sarah's old cupboard that he'd forgotten were there. Your wife cooked? Maylin asked on the 3rd day as she chopped vegetables for stew. Some, she was better at baking. Made bread that could make a man weep. Jacob smiled at the memory, finding it hurt less than it had. I've been living on hard biscuits and overcooked beans since she died. This is nice. Nice is not a word I have heard much lately, Mei Lin said quietly. That afternoon, while Jacob was in the barn, he heard horses approaching. His heart kicked into a higher gear as he grabbed his rifle and moved to the barn door. Through the falling snow, he could make out two riders, but as they came closer, he recognized Tom Bradshaw's bulk and the silver star pinned to his coat. The sheriff had brought his deputy, a young man named Pete Collins who couldn't have been more than 25. Jacob stepped out to meet them, keeping his rifle lowered but visible. "Jacob," Tom called, reining in his horse. "Didn't expect to find you home. Thought you might have snowed somewhere. Just barely made it back before the worst of it." Jacob kept his voice casual. "What brings you out here, Tom?" "Looking for someone." Tom dismounted, his expression serious. "Chinese girl, about 20 years old, ran away from a man in Butte 3 days back. Man's name is William Thornton. Maybe you've heard of him?" "Heard the name." Jacob's grip tightened on his rifle. "Can't say I've heard of any Chinese girl, though. Thornton's offering $500 for information leading to her return," Pete said eagerly. "Says she's dangerous, stole from him." "Dangerous?" Jacob let skepticism color his voice. "A 20-year-old girl. That's what the man says." Tom's eyes were sharp as they studied Jacob's face. "You sure you haven't seen anything unusual?" "No tracks, no signs of anyone passing through." "Storm would have covered any tracks by now," Jacob said. "And I've been keeping close to the house. Haven't been out riding the property." Tom nodded slowly. "Mind if we take a look around?" Just to be thorough, Jacob's mind raced. Mei Lin was in the house. If they searched, they'd find her in minutes. But refusing would only make Tom more suspicious. "Sure, but I'd appreciate it if you made it quick. I've got stock that needs tending." They searched the barn first, Pete poking into every stall and corner while Tom made conversation about the weather and the roads. Jacob's palms were sweating despite the cold. When they finished with the barn, Tom headed for the house. "Won't find much," Jacob said, following them inside. "Like I said, been keeping to myself." The house was warm, the stove crackling with fresh wood. Everything looked normal, no sign of Mei Lin anywhere. Tom walked through the kitchen, glanced into the front room. Then his eyes moved to the closed bedroom door. That bedroom? Yeah, Jacob's heart was pounding. Had Mei Lin heard them arrive? Was she hiding in the root cellar, or was she still in the bedroom trapped? Tom opened the door. The room was empty, the bed neatly made. Sarah's quilt was folded at the foot, and nothing looked out of place. Tom grunted and closed the door again. "Satisfied?" Jacob asked. "I suppose." Tom headed back toward the kitchen, then paused by the pantry. "What's down there?" "Root cellar." "You want to check it too?" Tom studied him for a long moment, and Jacob had the uncomfortable feeling that the sheriff saw more than he was letting on. But finally, Tom shook his head. "No need, like you said. Storm would have covered any tracks. If the girl came this way, she'd probably frozen to death by now." "Probably," Jacob agreed, though the words left a bitter taste in his mouth. After they left, Jacob waited a full 10 minutes before calling out softly, "They're gone." The trap door in the pantry floor lifted slowly, and Mei Lin climbed out, her face pale. "I heard everything." "You did good, staying quiet." Jacob helped her up, noticing how her hands shook. "Tom's a decent man, but $500 is a lot of money, and he doesn't know what Thornton really is." "No one knows," Mei Lin said. "That is how men like him survive. They show the world a respectable face while doing terrible things in private. Well, he doesn't know you're here. That buys us some time." Jacob moved to the window, watching the sheriff's horses disappear into the distance. "But we need a plan. Soon as the road's clear, they'll widen the search. Someone will come back. Then I will leave." Mei Lin's voice was steady, but he could hear the fear beneath it. "I will go before I bring more trouble to you." "And where?" You won't last a day out there, and every town between here and the border will have Thornton's men watching." Jacob turned to face her. "No, we need something better than you just running." "What?" Then, Jacob thought about Tom's eyes, about the suspicion he'd seen there. Thought about $500 and the pull that kind of money could have on a man's conscience. Thought about Mei Lin's bruises and the flat, dead tone of her voice when she described Thornton's plans for her. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but we'll figure something out." "We have to," that night as the wind picked up again outside. Jacob sat in Sarah's chair while Mei Lin slept fitfully in the bed. He thought about the choice he'd made, about the danger he'd invited into his life. A wiser man would have let Tom take her, would have pocketed the reward money and told himself he'd done the right thing. But Jacob had stopped being wise the day he'd pulled a dying woman onto his saddle. Now he just had to pray that his stubborn foolishness wouldn't get them both killed. The following morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. Jacob was in the barn mucking out stalls when he heard the crunch of boots on frozen snow. His hand went instinctively to the pitchfork, but he relaxed when he recognized the figure approaching, Martha Brennan, his closest neighbor from 5 miles south, bundled in so many layers she looked twice her normal size. "Martha!" He stepped out to greet her, wondering if his face showed the spike of panic he felt. "What brings you out in this weather?" "Could ask you the same about having visitors, Jacob Hartwell." Martha's shrewd eyes fixed on him. She was 60 if she was a day, had buried 2 husbands and raised 7 children on this unforgiving land. Nothing much got past her. "Saw smoke from your chimney yesterday and the day before." More smoke than a man living alone usually makes. Jacob's mind raced. Martha was known for her sharp tongue and sharper observations. She was also the closest thing Sarah had to a friend out here. Been keeping the house warmer. Gets lonely when it's this cold. Martha didn't sound convinced. "Tom Bradshaw stopped by my place yesterday. Said he was looking for a runaway Chinese girl, asking if I'd seen anything unusual." Her eyes stayed on Jacob's face. Told him no, of course. But then I got to thinking about all that smoke. Jacob weighed his options. He could deny everything, send Martha away, and hope she kept quiet. Or he could trust the woman who'd sat with him through Sarah's final days, who'd brought him food for weeks after the funeral when he'd been too lost in grief to feed himself. "You'd better come inside," he said finally. Mei Lin was in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread. She froze when Jacob entered with Martha, her eyes going wide with fear. For a moment, the only sound was the crackling of the stove. "So it's true," Martha said quietly. She moved closer, studying Mei Lin with the same careful attention she'd give to a skittish horse. "Lord have mercy, child. You look like you've been through a war." "Martha Brennan, meet Mei Lin." Jacob positioned himself between them, protective. Despite knowing Martha posed no threat. "Mei Lin, Martha's a neighbor. She can be trusted." "Can I?" Martha raised an eyebrow at him before turning back to Mei Lin. "That William Thornton is looking for you. Offering $500, saying you're a thief." "I stole nothing except my own freedom," Mei Lin said quietly, her hands still clutching the dough. "He is a liar. Figured as much." Martha pulled out a chair and sat down with a grunt. "Man who offers that much money isn't looking for a thief. He's looking for property he thinks he owns. I've been in this territory long enough to know the difference." Jacob felt tension he hadn't known he was carrying ease from his shoulders. "You won't tell Tom?" "Tom Bradshaw is a good sheriff, but he's also a man who follows the letter of the law without always thinking about the spirit of it." Martha accepted the cup of coffee Mei Lin poured with shaking hands. "Besides, no woman deserves to be dragged back to a man who beats her. I don't care what the law says about contracts or property." "Thank you." Mei Lin's voice was barely audible. "You are kind." "Kind nothing. I'm practical." Martha sipped her coffee, then made an approving sound. "This is good. Better than Jacob's swill anyway. Now let's talk about what happens next, because you can't hide here forever. They spent the next hour discussing options, each one more impossible than the last. Mei Lin couldn't go to any nearby town without being recognized. The Chinese communities in Butte and Helena would be the first places Thornton's men would search. Going south to Wyoming or north to Canada meant weeks of travel through winter conditions that had nearly killed her already. What about the Crow Reservation? Martha suggested. It's only 30 miles northeast. They don't have much love for white men's laws, especially when it comes to protecting someone from trafficking. Would they take her in? Jacob asked. Chinese woman? The Crow have their own history with being treated as less than human by men like Thornton. Martha's voice was hard. I know some folks there, traded with them for years. Man named Joseph Running Bear. He's a council member. Good man. I could send word, see if they'd be willing to help. It is too much danger for you, Mei Lin protested. Both of you have already risked so much. Girl, when you get to be my age, you realize there's no point in playing it safe all the time. Martha stood, draining her coffee. Jacob, you keep her hidden here. I'll ride to see Joseph. Should be back in 3 days if the weather holds. In the meantime, you two need to work on your story. Our story? Jacob frowned. If anyone else comes asking questions, you need a better explanation than smoke signals and empty denials. Martha pulled her coat tighter. Think about it. Come up with something believable. After Martha left, Jacob and Mei Lin stood in awkward silence. Outside, Chester whinnied, reminding Jacob that the horses still needed exercise despite the cold and the complications. He was reaching for his coat when Mei Lin spoke. Why are you doing this, really? Her dark eyes searched his face. You did not know me. You owe me nothing, yet you risk everything. Jacob thought about how to answer that. The easy response would be to say it was the right thing to do, that any decent person would help someone in need. But the truth was more complicated, more tangled up with grief and guilt and the desperate need to feel like his life still meant something. After Sarah died, I stopped seeing the point of much, he said slowly. Kept the ranch running because that's what you do, but everything felt hollow. Like I was just going through the motions, waiting for my own time to run out. He met her eyes. Then I found you in that snow, and for the first time in months, something mattered again. Keeping you alive mattered. Making sure you stayed safe mattered. Maybe that's selfish. Maybe I'm doing this more for me than for you. But either way, I'm not going to stop now. Mei Lin was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, in China we have a saying, if you save a life, you become responsible for it. I thought it was just words until now. I don't want you to feel responsible to me. That is not what I mean. She moved to the window, looking out at the white landscape. I mean that when someone saves you, they give you back more than just your life. They give you back possibility. Before, when Thornton owned me, I had no possibilities, no future except what he decided. But now, she turned back to him. Now I can imagine different futures. That is a gift I cannot repay. You don't need to repay it. Just survive. That's enough. They worked together that afternoon, falling into the rhythm they'd established over the past days. Jacob showed Mei Lin how to tend the chickens, laughing when she squeaked in alarm as a rooster flapped its wings at her. She taught him a few words of Chinese simple things like hello and thank you and beautiful, which he said while gesturing at the snow and made her laugh. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh, and the sound caught him off guard. It was bright and unguarded, nothing like the careful, controlled woman who'd been walking through his house like a ghost. For just a moment, she wasn't a victim or a fugitive. She was just a young woman laughing at a stubborn rooster. That night, over dinner, Mei Lin told him more about her life before America. She'd grown up in a small village outside Guangzhou, the youngest of 4 daughters. Her father had been a fisherman, her mother a seamstress. "They'd been poor but happy," she said, until the crop failures came and her father drowned in a storm. "My mother could not feed us all," Mei Lin said, stirring her tea. "When the men came offering work in America, she thought she was giving me a better life. She did not know what they really wanted." Bitterness crept into her voice. Or maybe she did know, and survival meant more than honor. "Don't blame your mother," Jacob said. "Desperate people make desperate choices." "Is that what you tell yourself? About letting me stay here?" He considered that. Maybe, or maybe some choices aren't about desperation. Maybe they're about being willing to fight for something worth fighting for. And I am worth fighting for? The question held genuine curiosity, not false modesty. Everyone is. Your life, your freedom, those aren't things anyone should have to beg permission for. Jacob stood, collecting their plates. Thornton thinks he can own people because he's rich and powerful. Proving him wrong? That seems worth fighting for. To me. On the second day of waiting for Martha's return, Jacob was repairing a section of fence near the main road when he spotted riders approaching. 4 men, moving with purpose. His blood ran cold as he recognized the lead rider, a hard-faced man named Vincent Cross, known throughout the territory as Thornton's enforcer. Jacob made himself continue working on the fence, keeping his movements casual even as his heart hammered. Cross and his men reined in their horses 20 feet away. "Hartwell," Cross called out. His voice was rough, like gravel being crushed. "Need to ask you some questions." "Already talked to the sheriff, Jacob." Sighed, not looking up from his work. "Told him everything I know, which is nothing. Maybe your memory needs refreshing." Cross dismounted, and his 3 men followed suit. They spread out, forming a loose semicircle. "Mr. Thornton is very interested in recovering his property. Very motivated. We've been authorized to conduct thorough searches of all properties in the area." "You have a warrant?" Jacob straightened, meeting Cross's eyes. "Don't need a warrant when we're searching for stolen property." Cross's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now you going to cooperate, or do we need to convince you?" Jacob's hand moved to his hip where his pistol usually hung. But he'd left it in the house, not expecting trouble. Stupid. Cross noticed the gesture, and his smile widened. "Looking for this?" One of Cross's men held up a rifle, Jacob's rifle, which he'd left leaning against the fence. "Found it just lying around, careless." The situation was spiraling out of control fast. 4 armed men against 1, and if he resisted, they'd have an excuse to tear apart his property. Jacob forced himself to stay calm, to think. "Fine, search the barn, search the house. You won't find anything. We'll be the judge of that." Cross jerked his head at 2 of his men. "You 2, check the barn. Riley, you're with me on the house." Jacob followed them back to the ranch, his mind racing. Mei Lin had to have heard the horses approaching. She knew to hide in the root cellar. But would she have had enough time? And would Cross and his men be thorough enough to find the trap door? The barn search was brutal. They tore through everything, appending crates, scattering hay, even climbing into the loft to check the rafters. Jacob watched helplessly as months of organized supplies were destroyed. Chester and Bess stamped nervously in their stalls, sensing the violence in the air. When they found nothing, Cross led the way to the house. Jacob's palms were sweating despite the cold. The main room, the bedroom, they tore through both with ruthless efficiency. Drawers were pulled out and overturned. Mattresses slashed open, shelves swept clean. "What's this?" Riley stopped in front of the pantry, nudging the door open with his boot. "Pantry, you see a Chinese girl hiding in there?" Jacob kept his voice level. Riley stepped inside, scanning the shelves of canned goods and dry supplies. His eyes moved down to the floor, and Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The trap door was visible if you knew to look for it, a square outline in the wooden floor, with a recessed metal ring for lifting. But Riley was looking at the shelves, not the floor. After a moment, he grunted and backed out. Nothing. Relief flooded through Jacob, so intense it made him dizzy. But it was short-lived. Cross was watching him with narrowed eyes, reading something in Jacob's face. "You know something," Cross said quietly. "I can see it. Where is she, Hartwell?" "Don't know what you're talking about." Cross moved fast, his fist connecting with Jacob's gut before he could react. Jacob doubled over, gasping for air. Another blow caught him across the jaw, sending him sprawling to the floor. Blood filled his mouth from a split lip. "Let's try this again," Cross said, standing over him. "William Thornton wants his property back. Anyone who helps or disappears is standing between him and what's his. You really want to be that stupid?" Jacob spit blood onto his own floor. "I told you, haven't seen any Chinese girl." Cross drew back his boot, and Jacob braced for the kick. But before it could land, a voice cut through the room like a blade. "Stop!" Everyone turned. Mei Lin stood in the pantry doorway, her face pale, but composed. She'd climbed out of the root cellar, Jacob realized, heard the violence and chosen to reveal herself rather than let him take more punishment. "Well, well." Cross's expression was triumphant. "There you are. Mr. Thornton's been worried sick about you." "I am sure he has," Mei Lin said. Her English was careful, precise, nothing like the frightened girl who'd whispered warnings in the dark. This was someone else, someone harder, who'd survived things that would have broken weaker people. "I will go with you." "But you leave him alone. He did not know I was here. I hid without his knowledge." "That's not," Jacob started, but Cross's boot caught him in the ribs, cutting off his words. "Shut up," Cross said. Then to Mei Lin, "Get your things. We leave now. I have nothing to get." Mei Lin walked forward, her movements deliberate. As she passed Jacob, still gasping on the floor, her eyes met his for just a moment. In that look, he saw apology and gratitude and something that might have been goodbye. Cross grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her toward the door. His men followed, satisfied smiles on their faces. The $500 reward was as good as in their pockets. Jacob pushed himself to his hands and knees, every breath sending sharp pain through his ribs. Through the window, he watched them mount up, watched Cross lift Mei Lin onto his horse, like she was nothing more than a sack of grain. She didn't struggle, didn't cry out. She just sat there, straight-backed and silent. As they rode away, when the sound of hoofbeats had faded, Jacob finally managed to stand. He stumbled to the kitchen, spit more blood into the basin. His reflection in the window showed a split lip, a darkening bruise along his jaw, and eyes that held a fury he hadn't felt since Sarah died. Mei Lin had given herself up to save him. She'd walked back into the nightmare she'd barely escaped because Cross was beating him. And now she was riding back to Thornton, back to the man who'd imprisoned and brutalized her, back to being sold to whoever could pay Thornton's price. Jacob thought about Martha's words, about having a plan. They'd been waiting for her to return with news from the Crow Reservation, waiting for a safe solution to present itself. But there was no time for safe solutions now. He moved to the bedroom, ignoring the pain in his ribs, and opened the chest at the foot of the bed. Beneath Sarah's quilts and winter clothes, he found what he was looking for, his old cavalry pistol from his army days, the Winchester rifle he'd carried through 3 campaigns, and a box of ammunition he'd hoped never to use again. Jacob had done his killing years ago in a uniform that gave him permission and orders that made it seem righteous. He'd thought those days were behind him, buried with his youth and his innocence. But as he loaded the weapons with hands that remembered every movement, he understood that some things never really ended. They just waited for the right reason to come back. Mei Lin had given him a reason. And Jacob Hartwell wasn't going to let her sacrifice be for nothing. Jacob was saddling Copper when he heard a wagon approaching. He spun, rifle in hand, then lowered it when he recognized Martha's weathered face beneath a fur-lined hood. But she wasn't alone. A crow man sat beside her on the bench, his long black hair streaked with gray, his dark eyes taking in everything with calm assessment. "This is Joseph Running Bear," Martha said, climbing down with effort. Her eyes went wide when she saw Jacob's battered face. "Good Lord, what happened?" "Cross and his men, they took her." Jacob's voice was rough, each word edged with barely controlled rage. "I'm going after them." Joseph dismounted with fluid grace despite his age. He studied Jacob for a long moment, then spoke in accented but clear English. "How many men?" "4, including Cross. They're heading back to Butte." "Figure." "Taking her to Thornton." Jacob checked the rifle's action, the familiar movements helping him focus. "I leave in 5 minutes." "You will die in 5 minutes," Joseph said flatly. 4 armed men, and you go alone with anger clouding your judgment? This is how foolish men become dead men. I don't have time for caution. Every hour they have her. Jacob's voice cracked. He steadied himself. You don't know what Thornton will do to her for running. I know exactly what men like him do. Joseph's expression was hard. My sister was taken by white men when she was 16. They found her body 3 months later in a creek bed. So do not tell me I do not understand. He moved to the wagon, pulling back a tarp to reveal weapons rifles, a bow, a tomahawk. But charging and angry only adds your body to the count. Martha told me about the girl. She asked if the crow would give her sanctuary. I came to say yes. But first, we must get her back alive. Jacob felt something in his chest loosen slightly. You'll help me? My nephew, James Walking Horse, is a tracker. Best in 3 territories. He is waiting 2 miles north with supplies and horses. Joseph began loading his weapons with practiced efficiency. We will catch Cross before he reaches Butte, but we do it smart, not stupid. Martha touched Jacob's arm. Let Joseph help. He knows what he's doing. Fine. Jacob swung into the saddle, wincing at the pain in his ribs. But we leave now. They rode hard, following the trail Cross had left in the snow. Joseph set a punishing pace, but his horse, a paint stallion that moved like liquid muscle, never faltered. Jacob's thoughts kept circling back to Mei Lin's face as Cross had dragged her away, the resignation in her eyes. 2 miles north, they found James Walking Horse waiting beside a stand of pines. He was younger than Joseph, perhaps 30, with a lean build and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He studied Jacob's injuries without comment, then pointed southeast. 4 riders, 1 carrying extra weight, James said. Moving fast but not careful. They think no one will follow. How far ahead? Jacob asked. 3 hours, maybe less. They stopped once to rest horses. James mounted smoothly. But there is something else. 2 more riders joined them from the east. 6 men now, Jacob swore. 6 against 3, and he was already injured. The odds were getting worse by the minute. But Joseph just nodded, as if he'd expected this. Thornton is careful. He sends reinforcements. Joseph looked at Jacob. This does not change things. Only means we must still be smarter. They rode in silence, James leading them along paths that paralleled the main trail. He moved like a ghost. Through the forest, finding routes Jacob would never have seen. Occasionally, he'd dismount to examine tracks or broken branches, reading the story Cross's group had left behind. As the sun began its descent, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink, James held up his hand. They stopped, and he pointed ahead to where smoke rose from a small clearing. They make camp, he whispered, confidence, careless. Jacob's hand tightened on his rifle. Then let's not waste their mistake. Wait. Joseph grabbed his arm. We scout first. Know their positions, their weapons, how they guard the girl. Then we plan. Every instinct in Jacob screamed to charge forward, to end this now. but he forced himself to nod. Joseph and James moved forward on foot, disappearing into the trees with barely a sound. Martha stayed with the horses, her own rifle across her. "Lap, that girl means something to you," Martha said quietly. "More than just saving someone in need." Jacob didn't answer immediately. He thought about the past days, about Mei Lin's laughter over the rooster, about the way she'd learned to make coffee, about how the house had felt less empty with her in it, how he'd found himself talking again, thinking about futures instead of just surviving one day to the next. "She gave me back something I thought I'd lost," he said finally. "Not sure what to call it. Purpose, maybe. Or just a reason to care. That's as good a reason as any to risk your neck." Martha checked her ammunition. Sarah would have liked her, I think. Yeah, she would have. Joseph and James returned 20 minutes later, their expressions grim. Joseph drew a quick map in the snow with a stick, marking positions. 6 men, as James said. Cross and 2 others by the fire. 3 more on watch here, here, and here. He pointed to spots around the perimeter. "The girl is tied to a tree near the fire. Cross wants her visible, wants to remind her she's his prisoner. How do we get her out?" Jacob asked. James smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "The watchers are not watching well. Too cold, too confident. I can remove them silently. Then we have only the 3 by the fire." 3 against 3, Martha said. "Better odds, not 3 against 3. Joseph's eyes met Jacob's. "I know you want to be the one to save her. But you are injured, and Cross knows your face. If he sees you, he will kill the girl immediately, just to hurt you. So you must trust us to do this part." Jacob wanted to argue, wanted to be the one who cut Mei Lin free and put a bullet in Cross's skull. But Joseph was right. His bruised ribs slowed him down, and Cross would recognize him instantly. If he wanted Mei Lin to survive, he had to let others take the lead. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. "Be ready with horses. When we bring her out, we run fast. Thornton will send more men when Cross does not return. We must be gone before they come." The plan was simple, which made it either brilliant or suicidal. Jacob wasn't sure which. James would eliminate the sentries one by one, using the darkness and his intimate knowledge of moving unseen. Joseph would position himself with a clear shot at Cross. Jacob and Martha would wait with the horses, ready to flee the moment Mei Lin was free. As night fell, Jacob watched James disappear into the shadows. Minutes stretched like hours. His hands were shaking from cold or nerves, he couldn't tell. Martha sat beside him, calm as stone, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her rifle. A night bird called out Joseph's signal. The first sentry was down, then another call, different pitch. The second sentry. Jacob counted his own heartbeats, each one too loud in his ears. A third call. All 3 sentries eliminated, and the men by the fire had noticed nothing. Now came the dangerous part. Through the trees, Jacob could see the fire's glow, could make out Cross's bulky silhouette. Mei Lin sat against the tree, her head bowed. Was she hurt? Unconscious? He couldn't tell from this distance. Joseph moved like smoke, positioning himself behind a fallen log 40 yards from the fire. His rifle came up slowly, sighting on Cross. James circled around to the other side, bow in hand. Against the firelight, the men were perfect targets. But one wrong move, one shout of alarm, and Mei Lin would die. Jacob saw James's arm draw back. The bowstring released with a sound like a sharp breath, and one of Cross's men dropped without a sound, an arrow through his throat. The other man turned, reaching for his gun, but Joseph's rifle cracked and he fell backward into the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. Cross moved faster than Jacob expected for a man his size. He rolled away from the fire, coming up with his pistol drawn, dragging Mei Lin in front of him as a shield. His gun pressed against her temple. "Come out," Cross shouted. Come out or I paint the snow with her brains. Joseph stepped into the firelight, rifle lowered. Let her go. Your men are dead. You are alone. I've got 5 bullets and a hostage, Cross snarled. I'd say I'm doing fine. Mr. Thornton does not pay you enough to die for him, Joseph said calmly. Walk away. Live to collect other bounties. Cross laughed, but there was an edge of panic in it. His eyes darted around the clearing, trying to locate other threats. You think I'm scared of some Indian with a rifle? I've killed better men than you before breakfast. Perhaps. But have you died before? James's voice came from behind Cross, and the outlaw spun, pulling Mei Lin with him. Jacob could see her face now bruised, terrified, but her eyes were blazing with fury, not resignation. In that moment, while Cross was distracted by James, Mei Lin moved. She drove her elbow backward into Cross's gut with all her strength. It wasn't enough to do real damage, but it surprised him, made his grip loosen for just a second. Mei Lin twisted, dropping her full weight, and slipped from his grasp. Cross's gun tracked toward her, and Jacob knew with sick certainty that he was going to shoot. Joseph's rifle was already swinging up, but he wouldn't be fast enough. Time seemed to slow, and Jacob saw how it would end Mei Lin dead in the snow. Another person he'd failed to save. Then James's tomahawk spun through the air, a dark blur in the firelight. It caught Cross in the shoulder, and his shot went wild, the bullet disappearing into the darkness. Cross staggered, reaching for the tomahawk embedded in his flesh, and Joseph's rifle spoke again. Cross dropped like a felled tree. Mei Lin scrambled to her feet and ran. She crashed through the underbrush, not caring about direction, just needing to get away. Jacob burst from his hiding spot, intercepting her before she could get lost in the forest. Mei Lin, it's me. She swung at him, wild with panic, and he caught her wrists. It's Jacob, you're safe. Look at me, you're safe now. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by tears. She collapsed against him, sobbing, and he held her while his ribs screamed protest. Over her shoulder he saw Joseph and James efficiently checking the bodies, gathering weapons and supplies. We must move, Joseph called. Gunshots will carry. Others may come. Jacob helped Mei Lin to where the horses waited. Martha had a blanket ready, wrapping it around the younger woman's shoulders. Mei Lin was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, but she managed to climb onto Copper in front of Jacob. They rode through the night, pushing the horses hard. James led them on a winding route that doubled back and crossed streams, destroying their trail. Every hour, Joseph would stop to listen, making sure they weren't followed. Jacob held Mei Lin close, feeling her gradually stop shaking as the distance grew between them, and the camp. Dawn found them at the edge of Crowlands, where a group of riders waited. Joseph's people, come to escort them to safety. An older woman dismounted and approached Mei Lin, speaking softly in a language Jacob didn't understand. Mei Lin responded haltingly, and the woman nodded with satisfaction. She speaks some Mandarin, Joseph explained. Many Crow traded with Chinese railroad workers. She will help translate, make Mei Lin feel welcome. Jacob watched as the woman led Mei Lin toward the other riders, saw how gently they treated her, offering food and water and kind words. This was safety, he realized. This was the future Joseph and Martha had planned, Mei Lin living with the Crow, protected by their sovereignty from Thornton's reach. But as Mei Lin turned back to look at him, Jacob felt something twist in his chest. She was safe now. The mission was accomplished. She didn't need him anymore. He should feel relief, satisfaction at a job well done. Instead, he just felt hollow. You can visit, Joseph said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Our lands are open to you. You helped return one of ours. My nephew's daughter married a Chinese railroad man. Their children are part of our community. You are a friend now. Thank you. Jacob's voice was rough. For everything. Thank your stubborn heart. Not many white men would risk what you risked. Joseph clasped his shoulder. Now go home, rest, heal, and when you are ready, come back. I think perhaps the girl would like to see you again. Martha drove Jacob back to his ranch in her wagon, neither of them speaking much. The sun was high by the time they reached his property, revealing the destruction Cross's men had left behind. Jacob stood in his torn-apart house, looking at the overturned furniture and slashed mattress, and felt a weariness that had nothing to do with his injuries. "I'll help you clean up," Martha offered. "No, you've done enough. More than enough." Jacob managed a smile. "Go home, Martha. I'll be fine." After she left, Jacob built up the fire and made coffee. He set Sarah's chair upright and sat in it, staring at nothing. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence more profound. For a few days, there had been life here, laughter and conversation, and the simple comfort of another person's presence. Now it was gone, and he was alone again, except he wasn't quite alone. On the kitchen table, he found something Mei Lin must have left before Cross took her, a small piece of paper with careful Chinese characters. He couldn't read them, but below, in English, she'd written, "Thank you for giving me back my life. I will not forget." Jacob folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket, over his heart. Then he stood and began the work of putting his house back together, one piece at a time. It was slow going with his injuries, but he didn't mind. For the first time since Sarah died, he had something to look forward to, a reason to heal, a reason to make the house welcoming again. Because Joseph was right. When he was ready, Jacob would visit Crowlands. And maybe, if he was lucky, Mei Lin would be glad to see him. Maybe there were possibilities waiting, futures neither of them had imagined yet. Maybe saving her life had saved his too, in ways he was only beginning to understand. 3 days after the rescue, Sheriff Tom Bradshaw appeared at Jacob's door. The lawman's face was unreadable as he surveyed the still visible damage to Jacob's home. The overturned furniture Jacob hadn't yet fully restored. The broken dishes swept into a corner. "Heard Vincent Cross turned up dead," Tom said without preamble. "Him and 5 others. Found in a camp about 20 miles south of here." Jacob kept his expression neutral. "That so?" "Bodies were torn up pretty bad. Could have been animals after they were dead, or could have been a message." Tom stepped inside uninvited, his boots tracking snow across the floor. 3 had arrows in them. "Crow arrows, if I'm any judge. You know anything about that?" "I know Cross. And his men busted into my house, beat me, and tore the place apart looking for something I didn't have." Jacob touched his still swollen jaw. "After that, I kept to my property. What happened to Cross isn't my concern." Tom was quiet for a long moment, studying Jacob's face the way he might study a suspect's alibi. "William Thornton is making a lot of noise. Says the Chinese girl murdered Cross and his men. Says she's dangerous, possibly insane. He's demanding the army get involved, wants them to search Crowlands." "Can they do that?" "Treaty says they can't without provocation. But Thornton's got friends in Washington, and he's pushing hard." Tom moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered range. "Thing is, I don't buy his story. Cross was a killer. Pure and simple. The men he rode with were no better. And I've seen what Thornton does to girls he employs. Met one once who made it out alive barely. She had scars that would make you sick." Jacob felt hope kindle in his chest. "You think Thornton's lying?" "I think a powerful man lost his property and his pride, and he's used to getting what he wants." Tom turned back to face him. "I also think that if a certain Chinese girl happened to find sanctuary somewhere Thornton can't reach, that might be justice the law can't provide. But if that was the case, the people who helped her should know Thornton doesn't give up easy. He'll keep pushing, keep searching, and he's got the money to make trouble for a long time." "If someone was helping her, hypothetically," Jacob said carefully, "what would you advise them?" "I'd say make sure she stays hidden. And I'd say watch your back, because Thornton knows someone helped her, and he'll be looking for revenge. Tom moved toward the door, then paused. I'd also say that sometimes the law can only do so much. Sometimes good people have to stand up. When the law fails, hypothetically speaking. After Tom left, Jacob stood at the window for a long time. The sheriff's visit was both a warning and a tacit blessing. Tom wouldn't actively pursue the truth, but he couldn't protect Jacob from Thornton's wrath either. The smart move would be to stay away from Crow lands, to put distance between himself and Mei Lin until Thornton's fury cooled. Jacob had never been particularly smart about these things. 2 weeks passed before he made the journey to Crowlands. His ribs had healed enough that riding didn't feel like torture, and the worst of the bruising had faded from his face. He brought gifts: tobacco for Joseph, flour and sugar for the community, and a new winter coat he'd purchased from the general store in Silver Ridge. The coat was dark blue wool, lined with fur, far more practical than the silk dress Mei Lin had been wearing when he found her. Joseph met him at the boundary markers, a slight smile on his weathered face. The stubborn rancher returns. We wondered how long you would wait. Wanted to make sure I wasn't followed. Jacob dismounted, handing over the tobacco. How is she? Come see for yourself. The Crow encampment was larger than Jacob had expected. A collection of lodges and wooden structures spread across a valley protected from the worst winds. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and children played in the snow, their laughter carrying across the cold air. People stopped to watch as Jacob passed, their faces curious but not hostile. Joseph led him to a lodge near the center of camp. She stays with my sister, Red Morning Woman, learning our language, our ways, but she asks about you often. Jacob's heart kicked harder in his chest. She does? You saved her life. That creates a bond not easily forgotten. Joseph pushed aside the lodge flap. Go on, I will wait here. Inside, the lodge was warm and smelled of sage and wood smoke. Mei Lin sat near the fire, helping an older woman stitch beadwork onto a leather shirt. She looked up as Jacob entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. She looked different. Healthier, with color in her cheeks and life in her eyes. Her hair was braided in the Crow style, and she wore buckskin clothing that fit her properly. The haunted, desperate look she'd carried at his ranch had faded, replaced by something steadier. Jacob. She set down her sewing and stood, a smile breaking across her face. You came. Said I would. He held out the coat awkwardly. Thought. You might need this. Gets cold up here. She took it, running her hands over the soft wool. It is beautiful. Thank you. Then, to his surprise, she moved forward and embraced him. He stood frozen for a moment before his arms came up to return the gesture, careful of where his hands rested. When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes. I was afraid you would not come. Afraid you would want to forget all of this. Forget. Me. Couldn't forget you if I tried. The words came out more honest than he'd intended. You doing all right here? Better than all right. These people, they have been kind. They teach me, include me. Red Morning Woman. She gestured to the older woman, who smiled warmly. She treats me like a daughter. I am learning to bead, too. Speak Crow, to ride horses properly. I am learning to be free. They talked for hours. Mei Lin showed him the beadwork she'd been practicing, the designs Red Morning Woman had taught her. She told him about the children who'd been fascinated by her Chinese features, about the elder who'd shared stories of his travels to San Francisco, about the Crow woman married to a Chinese man who'd helped her feel less alone. I am happy here, she said as the afternoon light began to fade. For the first time since coming to America, I feel like I belong somewhere. Like I am a person, not property. That's good, really good. Jacob meant it, even as he felt that hollow space in his chest open wider. She was happy, safe, building a new life. She didn't need him anymore. I should head back before dark. Will you come again? The question came quickly, almost desperately. Please. I would like to see you again. If you want me to, then yes. I want you to. She caught his hand, holding it between both of hers. You gave me back my life, Jacob. But more than that. You gave me back my faith that good people exist. That not all men are like Thornton. That is a gift I can never repay, but I can hope to keep you as a friend. If you will have me, I'd like that. Jacob squeezed her hands gently. I'd like that a lot. He visited again 2 weeks later, and then 2 weeks after that. Each time the journey felt shorter, the welcome warmer. Joseph started teaching him some Crow words. Red Morning Woman insisted he stay for meals, feeding him elk stew and fry bread that reminded him of Sarah's cooking, but tasted entirely its own, and Mei Lin. Each visit, he saw her grow stronger, more confident. She laughed more easily now, her smile coming quick and genuine. She showed him the new skills she'd learned, how to tan hide, how to identify medicinal plants, how to shoot a bow with surprising accuracy. James' walking horse teaches me, she explained after putting 3 arrows into the center of a target. He says I have natural talent. Or maybe I just have good reason to want to protect myself. You're remarkable, Jacob said, and meant it. Spring came slowly to Montana, the snow reluctant to release its grip. But as the days grew longer, green began to show through white. Jacob threw himself into ranch work, repairing winter damage and preparing for calving season. But no matter how busy he kept himself, his thoughts drifted back to Crowlands, to a Chinese girl learning to be free. It was during one of these visits, as the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom, that Mei Lin asked him to walk with her. Away from the camp. They followed a creek swollen with snowmelt, neither speaking, just enjoying the warmth of actual sunshine. There is something I need to tell you, Mei Lin said finally. About Thornton. Jacob felt tension coil in his shoulders. What about him? Joseph has scouts who watch. They say Thornton is still searching, still offering rewards. But more than that. She paused, choosing her words carefully. They say he has hired more men, dangerous men. Not to find me anymore, but to punish those who helped me escape. Let him come. Jacob's voice was hard. I'm not afraid of Thornton or his hired guns. I know you are not afraid. That is what worries. Mei Lin stopped walking, turning to face him. You have already risked so much. I do not want you to suffer more because of me. Then what do you want? She looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, a decision being made, a line being crossed. I want you to understand that you do not owe me anything more. You saved my life. You brought me to safety. That is enough. If you stop visiting, if you go back to your ranch and forget about all of this, I would understand. I would not blame you. And if I don't want to forget? The question hung between them. If I want to keep visiting, keep seeing you, what then? Then I would be happy. Her voice was soft. Happier than I have been in a long time. But I need you to be safe. I need to know that I am not putting you in danger just by existing in your life. Jacob reached out, gently touching her cheek. She leaned into his hand, her eyes closing briefly. Mei Lin, I was barely living before I found you. Just going through motions, waiting for my life to end. You changed that. You gave me a reason to care again, to fight again, to feel again. Whatever danger comes because of that, it's worth it. She opened her eyes, and he saw tears there. You are a good man, Jacob Hartwell, the best I have known. I'm just a man. But I'm a man who cares about you. The admission felt both terrifying and liberating. I don't know what that means yet, where it goes, but I know I want to find out. Mei Lin smiled through her tears. I would like to find out too. They stood there by the creek, snowmelt rushing past their feet, spring awakening around them. Jacob pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, over his heart. They didn't kiss that felt too soon, too presumptuous. But they held each other, and that was enough. For now, that was everything. When Jacob returned to his ranch that evening, he found his barn door hanging open. His heart sank as he dismounted, rifle in hand. Inside, someone had scattered his hay, spooked his horses. On the wall, carved deep into the wood with a knife, was a message. Thornton knows. Jacob stood staring at those words for a long time. Then he went to the house, built up the fire, and began cleaning his weapons. If Thornton wanted a war, he'd give him one. But he'd do it smart this time, not angry. He'd protect what mattered, fight for what he believed in, and he'd do it knowing that somewhere in Crow Lands, a Chinese girl who'd learned to be free was waiting for him to come back. That was worth any fight. That was worth everything. The next morning, Martha arrived with news. Joseph sent word. Thornton's hired men were spotted near the boundary markers. 6 of them, heavily armed. The Crow are preparing to defend their lands, but Joseph wants you to know you might want to stay away for a while. Keep yourself safe. Tell Joseph the first appreciate the warning, Jacob said. But I'm not hiding. If Thornton's men want to come after me on my own land, let them come. And tell Joseph something else. Tell him I'll stand with the Crow if it comes to a fight. They protected Mei Lin. That makes them family in my book. Martha studied his face, then nodded slowly. You're sure about this? About all of it? Jacob thought about Mei Lin's smile, about the way she'd leaned into his touch by the creek. Thought about having a reason to wake up each morning, having someone worth fighting for. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Then I'll pass along your message. And Jacob? Martha touched his arm. Sarah would be proud of you. Proud of the man you still are, despite everything. After Martha left, Jacob stood in his doorway, looking out at his land. Spring was coming, bringing with it new growth and new possibilities, but it was also bringing a reckoning. Thornton wouldn't stop until he'd extracted his revenge, until he'd broken everyone who dared defy him. But Jacob wasn't the same man he'd been 6 months ago. He wasn't the grief-hollowed rancher who'd contemplated just letting himself freeze to death in the snow. He was someone who'd remembered how to fight, how to care, how to live. And he'd be damned if he'd let Thornton take that away from him now. The attack came 3 nights later, when the moon was dark and the wind carried enough noise to mask the sound of approaching horses. Jacob woke to Copper's frantic whinnying from the barn. He was out of bed instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window. Shadows moved near his fence line. 4, maybe 5 men, spreading out to surround the house. They were trying to be quiet, but Jacob had spent enough years in the cavalry to recognize the movement of men preparing for an assault. He grabbed his pistol, checked both weapons, and made a decision that surprised even himself. He wasn't going to wait for them to come to him. Jacob slipped out the back door, using the darkness in the barn as cover. He could hear them now, whispering to each other, coordinating their approach. Thornton's hired guns, come to deliver their employer's vengeance. They expected to find a rancher asleep in his bed. An easy target. They found something else instead. Jacob's first shot took the nearest man in the leg, dropping him with a scream that shattered the night's quiet. The others scattered, seeking cover, and suddenly the darkness erupted with muzzle flashes. Bullets thudded into the barn walls, shattered windows in the house. Jacob rolled behind a water trough, returning fire methodically. He'd chosen his ground well. From behind the trough, he had clear sight lines to their positions while remaining mostly protected. Another shot, another man down, this one clutching his shoulder and cursing. 3 left that he could see, maybe more hanging back. Hartwell, a voice called from the darkness. Thornton just wants the girl. Tell us where she is, and we'll leave. You alive? Go to hell. Jacob shouted back, punctuating his response with another shot, but the odds were against him. For every bullet he fired, 3 came back. The water trough was being torn apart, water leaking from a dozen holes. His ammunition wouldn't last forever, and once the sun came up, they'd be able to surround him completely. Then he heard something that made his heart soar, the thunder of hooves, getting closer fast. Through the pre-dawn gloom, riders appeared. At least a dozen of them. Jacob recognized Joseph in the lead, with James beside him and other Crow warriors fanning out. Thornton's men saw them too. One tried to run and was cut down by James's rifle. Another threw down his weapons, hands raised. The remaining attackers chose fight over surrender, and the battle was brief and brutal. When the shooting stopped, 4 of Thornton's men lay dead, or dying, and 2 were on their knees with their hands bound. Joseph dismounted, surveying the scene with grim satisfaction. Our scouts saw them ride past our territory. We figured they were coming here. Good timing. Jacob lowered his rifle, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. I appreciate it. We protect our own. Joseph gestured to the prisoners. These 2 will tell us what we need to know. One of the prisoners, a lean man with a scar across his cheek, spat blood into the dirt. You're all dead men. Mr. Thornton has 20 more where we came from. He'll burn this whole territory down. To find that Chinese whore. Jacob moved before anyone could stop him, driving his fist into the man's face. Watch your mouth. Joseph pulled him back. Save your anger. We have bigger problems. He turned to the prisoner. Where is Thornton now? The man laughed through broken teeth. You think I'm telling you anything? You're gonna kill me anyway. Maybe, or maybe we turn you over to the territorial marshal. Tell him you were attacking a peaceful ranch. That's 20 years in prison, if you're lucky. Joseph crouched down, meeting the man's eyes. Or you tell us what we want to know, and we let you right out of here. Your choice. The man hesitated, calculating odds. Finally, his shoulders slumped. Silver Ridge. He's staying at the Grand Hotel, waiting for word. Brought 10 men with him, professional. Guns from Denver. He's planning to petition the territorial governor to authorize a search of Crow lands. Claims you're harboring a murderer. When? Jacob demanded. Tomorrow. Governor arrives on the afternoon train. Joseph and Jacob exchanged glances. If Thornton convinced the governor to authorize military action against the Crow, it would mean bloodshed on a massive scale. The tribe would fight rather than surrender Mei Lin, and the government would use it as an excuse to seize more Crow land, maybe disband the reservation entirely. We need to stop him, Jacob said. Before he reaches the governor. How? James asked. He has 10 guns with him. We would need an army. No. Jacob's mind was working fast, pieces falling into place. We just need the truth to come out. Thornton's power comes from respectability, from people believing he's a legitimate businessman. If we expose what he really is, show the governor who he's really dealing with. You need proof, Joseph finished. Evidence, not just words. Jacob thought about Cross's body, about the other men who died. Then he remembered something Mei Lin had mentioned during one of their visits. She said Thornton kept records. Ledgers showing all his business dealings, including the brothels, the trafficking. He kept them because he liked documentation and proof of what he owned. She saw them once in his study in Butte. Those ledgers would destroy him, Joseph said slowly. But they are in his house in Butte, 100 miles from here. We do not have time. Maybe we don't need to go to Butte. Jacob looked at the prisoners. You said Thornton brought his men to Silver Ridge. What else did he bring? The scarred man's eyes widened slightly, and Jacob knew he'd guessed right. He brought papers, didn't he? Documents to show the governor, to make his case seem legitimate. And I'd bet anything those real ledgers are mixed in with the fake ones, because a man like Thornton can't help but have them close. Room 12, the prisoner said quietly. Top floor of the Grand Hotel. He has them in a locked case under his bed. Joseph stood, a dangerous smile crossing his face. Then we pay Mr. Thornton a visit." They rode hard for Silver Ridge, leaving 2 Crow warriors behind to guard Jacob's ranch and deal with the bodies. As they approached the town, Joseph sent most of his men to wait in the surrounding hills. A dozen Crow warriors riding into town would cause panic. Only Joseph, James, Jacob, and 2 others continued forward. Silver Ridge was just waking up. When they arrived, the hotel clerk's eyes went wide when he saw them, but Joseph placed a gold coin on the counter, and suddenly the man's memory got very selective about who he'd seen. Room 12 was at the end of the hallway. Jacob positioned himself by the door, listening. Inside, he could hear snoring deep, rhythmic. Thornton was asleep, probably confident that his hired guns were killing Jacob. Right about now. Jacob tested the door handle. Locked. He looked at James, who produced a thin piece of metal and went to work on the lock with practiced ease. 30 seconds later, the door swung open silently. The room was lavish by frontier standards: thick carpet, velvet curtains, a brass bed where a large man slept beneath silk sheets. William Thornton in the flesh. He was older than Jacob expected, perhaps 50, with gray threading through his dark hair and jowls that spoke of too much rich food. Jacob moved to the bed and pressed his pistol against Thornton's temple. The man's eyes snapped open, and Jacob had the satisfaction of watching fear flood across that arrogant face. "Don't move. Don't scream. Just listen." Jacob's voice was cold. "Your men are dead. Your plan failed. And now you're going to give me those ledgers. I don't know what you're talking about." Thornton's voice was surprisingly steady for a man with a gun to his head. "I'm a legitimate businessman." "You're a slaver and a murderer," Jacob interrupted. "And we both know it." "The ledgers, where are they?" Thornton's eyes flicked toward the bed. Joseph and James were already moving, pulling out a leather case from beneath the frame. Joseph forced the lock with his knife and opened it. Inside were stacks of papers, account books, letters. His eyes widened as he scanned them. "This is everything," Joseph said quietly. "Names, dates, amounts paid for girls, payments to officials who looked the other way, deaths that were covered up." He looked at Thornton with disgust. "You kept records of all your crimes." "Those are private business papers," Thornton blustered. "You have no right." "We have every right," Jacob said. "You came after an innocent woman. You sent men to kill me. You threatened an entire community. That gives us plenty of rights." "The governor won't believe you," Thornton said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I have friends' influence. You're nobody, a failed rancher and a bunch of savages. Who do you think people will believe?" "Let's find out." Jacob hauled Thornton out of bed. "Get dressed. You're coming with us." An hour later, Jacob stood in Sheriff Tom Bradshaw's office, watching the lawman read through the ledgers with growing horror. Thornton sat in a chair, hands bound, his face having gone from red with outrage to pale with dawning understanding. "Sweet merciful Jesus," Tom muttered, turning another page. "He's documented everything. Every girl he bought, every official he bribed, He looked up at Thornton. "Did you think you were untouchable? That no one would ever see these?" "Those are stolen property," Thornton said, but his voice was weak. "Illegally obtained. They can't be used against me." "Maybe not in a court of law," Tom agreed. "But the governor doesn't need a court. He just needs to know the truth." He looked at Jacob. "The train arrives in 2 hours. Governor Mitchell is a hard man, but he's fair. If we show him this, Thornton's finished." The meeting took place in the Silver Ridge Town Hall, with half the town trying to crowd in to see. Governor Mitchell was a tall, stern-faced man who listened without expression as Tom laid out the evidence. He read through the ledgers, examined the documents, questioned both Jacob and Joseph about what had happened. Thornton tried to bluster, to deny, to call them all liars. But the evidence was overwhelming. and his desperation only made him look more guilty. When he tried to claim that Mei Lin had murdered his men, Jacob produced statements from the sheriff and witnesses that told a very different story. "Mr. Thornton," the governor said finally, his voice cold as mountain ice, "I've seen corruption before, but this is beyond the pale. You'll be arrested and held for trial on charges of human trafficking, bribery of public officials, and conspiracy to commit murder. Your assets will be frozen pending investigation. You can't do this." Thornton lunged forward, and 2 deputies grabbed him. "I have rights. I have friends in Washington." "You had friends," the governor corrected. "Now you have crimes to answer for. Take him away." As the deputies dragged Thornton out, still screaming threats and protests, Jacob felt something release in his chest. It was over, really over. Mei Lin was safe, not just from Thornton's immediate reach but from his power entirely. The governor turned to Jacob and Joseph. "I owe you both an apology. We've heard rumors about Thornton's activities for years, but he had too many people protecting him. You've done the territory a service by exposing him. We just protected someone who needed protecting," Jacob said. "Still, I want you to know that as long as I'm governor, the Crow lands will be respected. No unauthorized searches, no harassment. You have my word." He shook Joseph's hand, then Jacob's. "And if there's anything you need, you let me know." Jacob rode back to Crow lands with Joseph and James, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. When they arrived, word of what had happened had already spread. People came out to greet them, to celebrate, to hear the full story. Mei Lin was waiting by Red Morning Woman's lodge. When she saw Jacob, she ran to him, and he caught her, lifting her off the ground. She was crying and laughing at the same time, and he found himself doing the same. "It's over," he told her. "Thornton's going to prison. You're free, really free." She pulled back to look at him, her hands framing his face. "Because of you. Because you would not give up, would not stop fighting. Because you were worth fighting." For that night, the Crow held a celebration. There was food and music, dancing and stories. Jacob sat beside the fire with Mei Lin close against his side, watching sparks rise into the star-filled sky. Joseph proposed a toast to unexpected alliances and stubborn hearts. Martha, who'd ridden over as soon as she heard the news, added her own toast to people who did the right thing even when it was hard. As the celebration wound down and people began drifting to their lodges, Mei Lin took Jacob's hand and led him away from the fire. They walked to the same creek where they'd stood weeks ago, where spring had just been beginning and possibilities had seemed both frightening and wonderful. "What happens now?" Mei Lin asked quietly. "You have your ranch. I have a place here with the Crow. We could both go back to our lives knowing Thornton can never hurt us again." "We could," Jacob agreed. "Or we could figure out something else, something new. What would that look like?" Jacob thought about his empty ranch, about the silence that had defined his life for so long. Then he thought about Mei Lin's laughter, about working beside her in his kitchen, about the way she made everything feel alive again. "I don't know exactly. Maybe you could visit the ranch sometimes, stay if you wanted. Or I could split my time between there and here. We could take it slow, figure it out as we go. I would like that." Mei Lin stepped closer, her hand finding his. "Taking it slow, but together." "Together," Jacob agreed. Then finally he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative, a question and an answer all at once. She kissed him back, her arms coming around his neck, and in that moment, Jacob understood that sometimes the most broken people find each other and become whole again. Months passed. Summer came to Montana, bringing green grass and wildflowers and long warm days. Jacob split his time between his ranch and Crow lands, building bridges between two worlds. Mei Lin learned ranching, and Jacob learned more about Crow traditions. They were careful with each other, respectful of the wounds they both carried. But slowly those wounds healed into scars, still visible, still part of them, but no longer. Bleeding Martha attended the small ceremony when on a crisp autumn day, Jacob and Mei Lin were married according to both white and Crow traditions. Joseph performed the Crow blessing, speaking about two souls finding each other across impossible distances. Sheriff Tom came too, bringing word that Thornton had been convicted and sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. Justice, Tom said, raising a glass. Doesn't always come quick, but when it does, it's sweet. As winter approached again, a full year since Jacob had found a dying girl in the snow, he stood with Mei Lin on the porch of his ranch house, watching the first snowflakes fall. She was wrapped in the blue coat he'd given her, and she leaned against him with comfortable familiarity. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. "When did you found me?" "Every day," Jacob admitted. "I think about how close I came to riding past. How different everything would be if I had. But you did not ride past. You stopped. You saved me." She turned to look up at him. "Why did you really do it, Jacob? The truth." He considered the question, thinking back to that frozen afternoon, to the grief that had been drowning him. "Because I needed saving too. I just didn't know it until I saw you there in the snow. Saving you saved me. We rescued each other." Mei Lin smiled, that bright, unguarded smile that had become his favorite sight in all the world. "Then I am glad. We were both lost when we found each other." Inside the warm house, dinner was waiting. The table was set for 3. Martha was coming over, as she did most nights now. The rooms that had echoed with emptiness were filled with life and laughter and love. Sarah's things were still there, carefully preserved, but they'd made space for new memories, new beginnings. As Jacob held the door open for Mei Lin, snowflakes catching in her dark hair, he thought about all the ways a life could change in a single moment. A woman dying of fever. Another woman dying in the snow. A choice to stop, to care, to fight when it would have been easier to walk away. "Come on," Mei Lin said, tugging his hand. "Before the food gets cold." Jacob followed her inside, into the warmth and light, leaving the snow and the darkness behind. He'd spent months living in the past, haunted by what he'd lost. But now he was living in the present, grateful for what he'd found. And when he closed the door against the winter night, he knew with absolute certainty that he was home. Not just in the house, but in the life he and Mei Lin were building together too. People who'd survived the impossible, who'd found each other when both had given up hope, who'd learned that sometimes the best things come from the worst moments, if you're brave enough to reach out and take them. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering everything in white. But inside, there was warmth and laughter and the sound of people who loved each other planning their tomorrow. And that, Jacob thought as he sat down to dinner with his wife and his friend, was all the ending anyone could ask for. It was also, in all the ways that mattered, a beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.